Well, that was fun. But what am I going to do now? Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Alex, and this is the corner of the internet where I mostly post reviews for video games and video game demos, though I also occasionally post about my other interests like my art, so if that's the kind of thing you're into, I hope you'll stick around. Now, today I have some very exciting news. Back in 2023, I backed a Kickstarter hosted by a small studio called Cloud Games that sought to bring their vision of a Solarpunk MMO centered around sustainable living to life. The Kickstarter very quickly surpassed all of its initial and stretch goals to the tune of almost $1.3 million by the end of August 2023. And almost 3 years later, on Earth Day 2026, this game finally entered its beta playtest. The playtest ran for 2 weeks, allowing players ample time to finish up the beta quests, learn the ins and outs of farming, and explore several districts of Loftia such as the Hanging Gardens, Gridfall, and of course, Loftia City. Before we get too far into things today though, I do just want to mention that if you notice any graphics issues throughout this video, I was unfortunately playing with my VSync setting turned off for the first day without realizing it, so footage from that first day unfortunately may have some small glitches or screen tearing. Of course, this was also a playtest, so in general, glitches and bugs were absolutely expected, and while I may discuss some of the admittedly very few problems I encountered, it should be noted that the team over at Cloud Games is at work combing through player feedback and working to patch a lot of the issues those of us in the beta playtest group found before the game moves to early access. Which is to say, please don't hold any of these problems against the devs at this time. Stuff like this is why we have alpha and beta playtests for games, and you can expect these problems to likely be fixed before the game goes public. With that out of the way, let's talk about Loftia. From the moment I got into character creation for this game, I knew I was going to be in for a treat. The character models are absolutely adorable, with a plethora of options and fully customizable colors for every part of your character. You can really let your creativity shine through, or create a character that looks just like you. There are also a ton of cosmetic items to unlock and craft throughout the game, something that I was very pleased with, and it also looks like there will be additional cosmetics available through the Community Pass system after the game releases. Community Pass was available for free in the beta test, however it will be a paid service once the game actually releases. You guys know I've had a fair amount to say about paywalls like this and how they can be problematic at best and predatory at worst because of how they feed off of FOMO. And admittedly, I was a little disappointed to learn that this form of paywalling will be in Loftia. That said, while it disappoints me a bit to hear, the team has explained that this is a large part of how Loftia plans to maintain their live service. And not only will Community Pass only be limited to cosmetic items, but they also won't be time limited, which is a large part of the problem with how these mechanics tend to operate in other games. I say all this not to give Loftia a free pass. I do think that paywall mechanics, especially on games that aren't free to play to begin with, are still problematic, and again, I am disappointed to hear that such a wonderful game will be using one of my least favorite features in the modern era. But hearing that the items behind the pass will be strictly cosmetic and not time limited lessens the blow a bit. And honestly, I do think it's a little bit more understandable for an indie live service title to implement these features compared to some other companies. It's not my favorite news, but for now I am willing to look the other way about it. Now, after character creation, you'll meet Pebble, who will help you get started on your life in Loftia and introduce you to other characters who will help you along the way through the game's tutorial quests to give you a bit of a basic understanding of the mechanics you'll see and use throughout. Things like foraging, collecting scrap, farming, crafting, and license upgrades. Wait, what are license upgrades, I hear you ask? Well, one of the core concepts you'll notice in Loftia is sustainability. Being a Solarpunk title, this game is very big on modeling sustainability methods, and that includes limiting player use of their land to ensure that their floating islands that they live on can handle it, as well as making sure you're using the land responsibly. This mechanic isn't something that's enforced too harshly at all, since the main way you unlock more licenses to allow you to place more items on your island is simply through farming and then selling what you grow, then using the money you earn from that to upgrade your licenses, and I found it to be a well-balanced model that puts that sustainable living model at center stage without actually making it feel like much of a limiting factor. Licenses aren't the only way that sustainability is modeled, though. As you'll come to learn, your energy for being able to craft and use machinery is fueled by renewable energy resources. On your island, you'll be able to place things like solar panels and biofuel generators that will allow you to recharge, and over in places like the Gridfall, you'll find interesting and innovative methods of generating electricity, such as the tactile pads that convert kinetic energy into electricity. I also noticed that wind turbines are able to be seen on distant islands from the neighborhood islands, and while there has been some debate as to whether or not wind turbines can actually be that great for the environment due to their use of fossil fuels in production, one could assume that a society like Loftia has likely found ways to move beyond this. But I think the wind turbines were a really nice touch in the name of scenery, if nothing else. But hey, you're probably not here to listen to me drone on about sustainability, right? Let's move on to some of the other features that were available to players during the Loftia playtest. Being an MMORPG, Loftia has a focus on community and has implemented several features to encourage player engagement with one another. The spotlight feature for the community aspect of this game has got to be the community farming minigame. At the top of every hour, you'll be able to travel to the Hanging Garden with other players and participate in this minigame, which will have you planting and watering crops to meet collective goals in the community farm. You'll have only a few minutes to earn as many points as you can and earn yourself prizes like free seeds to plant on your own farm or clothing fragments which can be used to craft new clothing items. There are also other collaborative and community features such as the adventure quests, the house showcase, and even a minigame that can be initiated at any time where you work with other players to keep a ball in the air for as long as possible. But community farming was definitely my favorite community-centered feature available in the playtest. I do think it's also worth mentioning that during my time in the beta playtest, I noticed that the community was super welcoming and kind. I also actually really enjoyed the fact that while Loftia is an MMO, and it does encourage community engagement, the social aspects of this game never feel particularly forced on players. While you do have to do at least one of each major community feature to complete the quest line, you don't have to use these features again if you don't want to, allowing folks who would desire to have a more single-player-esque experience within the multiplayer framework to be mostly able to do so. While I'm sure some of you would question why someone would even bother playing a game that is exclusively multiplayer if they didn't want to engage with other players, I think the people who get it will get it, and will appreciate that these features remain largely optional. As someone who does enjoy more of a single-player or pseudo-single-player experience in most games, I personally spent a lot of my time engaging in the quest line, and personally, I found the story told in the beta quest to be well-paced, well-written, and very fun. It was a fun way to get introduced to the major mechanics of the game and the world of Loftia, without making it feel overwhelming or forcing the social features too heavy-handedly. Now, despite being a beta, this game ran relatively smoothly. As I mentioned before, I was noticing some graphics problems on my first day playing. However, when I started looking through my settings, I realized that was a problem on my end for the most part, and not actually on the game. That's not to say there weren't problems. Namely, the things I noticed most were players occasionally getting glitched through the map or stuck in places that maybe shouldn't have been accessible to begin with. Thankfully, it seems that the devs saw this coming and implemented a designated button to send players back to the start of whatever area they're in, making it so that any incidents of getting stuck are easily resolved. Another interesting bug I noticed, though, is that some clothing items will only change the color of half of the piece. Of course, despite these quirks, I really do have to hand it to the devs for how stable their game ended up by the beta phase. I've seen games at full release with more problems than occasional clipping through the map or minor cosmetics glitches. In general, you guys know I love indie games, and honestly, I know I tend to be pretty lenient on problems in indie titles, maybe to a point where some people consider it hypocritical. But I am really impressed with the level of dedication shown by the Loftia team, and I cannot believe how amazingly this game is coming along. There is something so incredibly rewarding about seeing these crowdfunded games come to life over the course of several years, and every single time I see a Kickstarter project I've backed reach another milestone like this, it really warms my heart. I absolutely adore indie games and the powerhouse that crowdfunding can be for making people's dreams come true. I know Kickstarter has had its flops, projects that don't come to fruition or don't turn out how they were expected to, and I understand the hesitation behind supporting games funded this way. I'm not going to name it here, but there is a title I backed several years ago that some of you can probably guess, which has been nearly radio silent and is possibly in some hot water legally. So again, I totally get if you're hesitant to support these games, but honestly, for every one game or project I've had pass its expected deadline with no noteworthy progress, I've ended up receiving and loving 6 completed or significantly progressed games with seemingly a 7th well on its way. There are absolutely lemons to be found on Kickstarter. That's the nature of the platform. But I also absolutely believe the majority of these games are worth taking the chance on. I have loved every single title I have received from crowdfunding programs. So, if you take nothing else away from this video, please remember to support indie games and crowdfunded projects. I know my videos about indie titles don't perform very well in the algorithm, but as someone who has seen both sides of the game development coin, that being both the player and the developer, I will always champion these indie titles. Indie games are, to me, one of the biggest examples of someone or maybe a few people pouring their dreams out into the world and fighting to make them come true. They're an amazing display of both hope and vulnerability. Indie developers know that if their game fails, that might be it. While a major studio can have 1 or 2 bad games and recover, that can't always be said for indies. One bad game can truly be what makes or breaks their careers. Success and failure is the line between achieving greatness and being put into unimaginable debt. There is so much weight held in so many of these little studios, and for that, I will always respect them. Anyways, I think this is probably a good spot to leave off for today. Loftia is super fun, and I cannot wait to jump right back into it when early access releases. Remember, support indie games, and until next time, stay cozy.